So this week we are going to be tackling the subject of how to write experiences that you haven't had personally. So things that you aren't familiar with. There could be, there's a whole lot of different things. Like it could be anything from a gender you are not, to a mental illness you don't have, to a physical disability you don't have. So I'm going to start off by identifying that I am physically disabled. I have Ehlers-Danlos. I have POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I have a whole lot of different physiological problems. I have depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and a whole bunch of other things too that I also wrestle with. So identifying this is me telling you this so you can understand where I'm coming from and know that I do have some experience with some of this stuff. And that's totally okay. You're welcome to write with, like, everything I write is going to be colored by the fact that I'm a New Englander. So that's okay. I'm not telling you to write something different. I'm just saying, like, writing a character whose life experiences you haven't had. So I had somebody bring up the fact that they're trying to write somebody with a mental health problem. My husband exploded, bless you. A mental health struggle that they're working on. This is their character, not them personally, but it's not a mental health issue that they themselves have, so they don't know how to write it. And the best way to handle things, first off, of course, there's the old chestnut, write what you know, but it is only half the phrase. Yeah, my husband exploding is definitely an outside experience. The other half of the phrase of write what you know is what you don't know, research. And when you're talking about writing like an experience somebody has, part of that research could be talking to somebody who has that thing or has had the experience that you're trying to understand, or multiple, since none of these collections of things are a monolith. So if you're a man trying to write a woman, for example, you could always go to talk to a woman about what it's like in these kind of circumstances. Like, how would you handle this? What would you see? And that could be a very solid way of helping you develop an understanding of what it's like to be what you're not. If you're trying to write somebody from another country or culture, obviously research that culture as extensively as possible and talk to people from that area to try and get data and write about it with the most authentic understanding you can. That's how I would handle it. Like, I don't think that I can lead. If you're trying to understand something, you can ask me. I don't have any problems explaining things if it comes down to it. And because if you're asking like technical questions, I will answer you. And that's okay. And I also leave that open to anybody. If you have questions about what post-traumatic stress disorder is like, the kind of anxiety I've dealt with sexual assault, I've dealt with physical assault, I've had a lot of varied and weird life experiences. And if you're trying to understand something for the purposes of writing a book, ask me about them and I will explain, maybe not like all the details of what I went through personally, but I can tell you a lot about what is around that sort of experience. I'm an open book as far as that goes, so if I can help you write something more authentically, I will. And that's kind of one of the things, is find somebody open to talking to you about whatever it is. If you're trying to write about even if it's something as simple as owning a cat, like your character owns a cat, but you've never had a cat before, talk to a couple cat owners, see what it's like. And of course, watch videos. You could watch, I think his name is Jackson Galaxy, he's the cat whisperer dude. And you could watch videos about cats and read articles and learn about them, but it's also really important to talk to the person who has the thing. When you're addressing some specific things, like disability, for example, recognizing that the disability community is not a monolith, by which I mean everybody with disabilities kind of experiences things themselves, and we all have kind of different opinions on things. For example, Some of you may or may not have heard of this. This is a US kind of thing. There are a number of people who prefer to say, I'm a person with disabilities, not I'm a disabled person. They prefer what's called person-first language, which puts the focus and emphasis on the sentence, in the sentence, on the fact that they are a person who has these various different things, rather than the various different things, like, as an adjective. Now, me, I despise it. I find it's really awkward wording, and I don't like it. And there are a number of people who feel similar to me, particularly autistic people. They prefer to, by and large, be called autistic people, not people with autism. And as a neurodivergent myself, maybe that's where it comes from. You know, I prefer to be a disabled person, not a person with disabilities, because just linguistically it makes me twitch. Which is... And there might be other folks who have different opinions and feelings on that. You are likely to run into... There might be some autistic people who say, I really prefer to be a person with autism. I don't know any, but they could certainly exist, and that's okay. And when you come up against something like that, and you're trying to be like, okay, well, how do I write this? Just recognize that, to some extent, no matter what you write, it's not going to be perfect for everyone, which is a reality. So do the best you can and try and get the barometer of the community and try and do what makes sense to that community. Like, yeah, it doesn't roll off the tongue, and I'm not diagnosed with autism, but I strongly suspect I have it, and that suspicion comes from also from some friends, a friend of mine who's a psychiatric nurse and knows her stuff, so I suspect that I'm autistic, and she thinks it might be the case. So I don't like people with autism. Like, I don't like people with disability. I don't like the phrase people with disabilities. I like plenty of people who have disabilities, but the phrase doesn't fit for me. I just don't like it. But that is an example of the community not being a monolith. There are a lot of people who would rather say, I'm a person with disabilities. In fact, there are a lot of people who get kind of rabid about it. And that's, people can self-identify however they want. And writing about things that are sensitive, like, for example, if you're trying to write about somebody with, say, multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, sorry, not MPD, they changed the name, you're going to want to study what DID really is, how people end up with it, what the experience is like, and you're going to want to kind of focus in on how that impacts them. And if you can find somebody with DID to talk to them, great. If you can't, you can watch footage of people with DID talking about it. And there are probably places you could go to ask those questions. Online communities, whether it's social media, a forum, there are all kinds of places where you can find folks with different experiences and see if there's somebody you can ask about it. And you can say, I'm a writer trying to wrap my head around this because I would like to present this authentically. Yes, they do, and researching that kind of stuff in a neuroscience book has serious value, and I strongly recommend doing that kind of research too, when you're writing something outside your experience. But if you can talk to a person who has the thing, who has the experience, you're going to get a lot more of the, this is what it feels like to be me sort of data, which is sort of lacking from a lot of the more scientific stuff. Also, for example, you could read, I don't know about the rest of the world, but in America, the gold standard for mental health definitions is called the DSM-5. It's right now it's 5. The Diagnostician's Manual 5. I don't remember the name, but it's the big book of psychology and contains the definitions of all of the diseases. The problem with it is it's actually behind the science. So if you were to write a novel and have your character be a textbook, let's say autistic person out of the DSM-5, they're going to be missing a lot of traits that actual autistic people have, or will have traits that aren't actually related to autism, because these things are, because they're being constantly researched and updated. My husband says it is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM. Uh, I'm not familiar with the NCBI. I could probably look it up. Um, the name sounds vaguely familiar, but the reason I bring that up is because you have to researching things on a purely scientific level without talking to somebody who has the experience, you could end up missing some nuances that science may not have caught up to yet, or things like that. So if you have the opportunity, and yes, autism does vary wildly from case to case. Like I am diagnosed with ADHD. That is clear cut. The autism is a suspicion, but in order to get actually diagnosed, I would need to go through a number of frustrating and extremely expensive and long tests that would probably come up negative, if only because I have learned how to mask the behaviors so well as an adult. But as a child, I would have fit into it. However, I never bothered getting testing because it would be expensive, it would be frustrating, it might not give me any answers, and there's no way to, quote, treat it per se anyhow, so it makes no difference to me. I can just research how my brain works and get the data I want, which is really what's going to help me in the long run, is learning how to be me. And yes, and since it's so different from case to case, you're not going to have, like, it's not like a broken arm, you know? Uh, so that is kind of what I mean, like when writing, particularly mental health disorders, you're going to want to talk to a person who has the lived in experience to give you data. And you might want to talk to multiple because, as Nid so brilliantly pointed out, it differs from person to person. And you're going to get that with all sorts of topics, whether it's writing, like I said, a gender you're not. Like, you know, you talk to like 12 women about something and you might get wildly different information. But there are likely to be things we all like agree on and are like, oh yeah, this is it. Like this is how this is gonna work. Um, there was I was watching an example of this. I was watching a Let's Player play a video game. It was Beyond Two Souls specifically, and his character in the game is female. He is not. He walked into a bar and some stuff happened with some of the people, and the next video he said he went back and, you know, was looking at the comments, and all the women in the comments were like, oh no, oh no, 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 don't do that. And we all knew exactly what was going to happen because most women have been in the circumstances in that bar, and since he'd never had that experience, he didn't realize that this was what was about to go down because he wasn't used to being on guard for that kind of thing. So that's going to be one of those more universal female experiences where there's some skeevy guys at the bar who you know are planning something and you don't let them get the chance to. That's going to be the kind of thing like, you know, if you talk to a woman, we'll tell you exactly how to pinpoint what we're looking for. And if you're writing a scene where that's germane, it's worth talking to somebody about that. And I keep coming back to like women and like neurodivergence and stuff because, as I mentioned, that's my center of experience, so I can only relate me. But the like another key thing is if you're going to be writing about I can talk to you about that, Nid, if you want. If I haven't spent a lot of time in, well, I've spent a lot of time in bars, but I spent it all as a karaoke host, as an employee. I wasn't hanging out there as a patron, which makes a kind of a bit of a difference in the experience. Give me just a second. I need to take some migraine medication because all of a sudden one is sneaking up on me and I don't want it to get awful. So give me just a sec here. Sorry about that. That's going to be all on camera, so anybody who watches the video later gets to watch me take some migraine medication on camera. Woohoo! Exciting. Watch E do drugs. Anagram, that's not entirely how it works. Okay, I got drunk in a bar once, but that's a story I'm not telling on camera. And I'm not telling it anywhere that can be recorded. So, another, another thing is, like, particularly if you're talking about experiences with, like, race, what it's like to be a person who has a wildly different experience than you do. Like, I can't really write with authenticity from the perspective of a black person in America, because I have never faced the things that they have, and it's not something with which I'm intimately familiar. And I wouldn't feel comfortable trying to write that experience because I don't feel like I could do it justice. Now, I'm not telling you not to write from the perspective of somebody who's a different race or a different cultural experience than you. That's fine. But it's just, I don't think I could personally do it in a way that would do the experience, like, proper justice. And if I can't do it properly, I don't really want to do it and mess it up. Sensitivity readers is definitely a thing, and I strongly suggest it. Hi, Teague. The video is going to be for replay. Right now, you're not going to see anything because with the stage channel, I cannot share my webcam. And also, I cannot share my webcam and record it at the same time, so video is just going to be playback later. Not that you're missing anything, it's just me talking on camera, so nothing super exciting. It just makes it slightly more interesting when you're watching the YouTube video. So, that's... Ellie brings up sensitivity readers, which are very much a thing you can do if you are working with something like a sensitive subject, or if you're trying to get something right. I don't know if I'd always call it a sensitivity reader, perhaps. OBS can do that, but my webcam doesn't like to split the... Anyway, I can explain later. So a sensitivity reader is a term that is more or less somebody who has lived the experience you're trying to portray and will know if you're doing it in a problematic manner. Which is absolutely an important thing, I think. However, basically the sensitivity reader is someone who makes sure you get your research right, more or less. And yes, definitely people love stereotypes to some extent, but the problem is if the stereotype is going to be harmful, like Speedy Gonzalez. I am not in any way Hispanic, so I can't speak on it with authority by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know if that character is considered problematic for them. I do think that and again, there's a bit of a cultural thing here, because Lee, your culture is probably different in where you live than it is where I am. But people here, if you write a piece that has a lot of elements that kind of stereotype people in a bad way, it causes problems. Like, for example, there's a well, Nid, yeah, I don't know for sure. I don't know anything about Speedy Gonzalez and whether or not he is appropriate or was canceled or whatever. And a lot of the time, I will admit completely that there is a large group of people who like to go out white knighting on behalf of communities, and who aren't that, and they like to go around like, you can't say that, it's wrong, and the people who are in the community are like, could you just shut up for like 5 minutes? I've had that happen to me a couple of times where I was talking about some ADHD stuff and making some jokes, and somebody jumped in and was like, you can't say that about ADHD people, it's offensive. And I was like, yeah, well, I am ADHD people, and all the ADHD people in this thread are laughing. I can make jokes about myself. I'm not going to say SJWs, and I'm not going to get into that, because that gets real political real fast. I'm just going to say that there are people out there who behave in a manner that is problematic and doesn't actually help the people they believe they're trying to help. And I'm not going to assign it to any particular political spectrum or anything like that, because it's oftentimes an individual, and while there may be a type who sometimes engages in that in the wrong way, I'm not in any way going to try and pigeonhole it, because I have seen people across divides try and white knight, and it doesn't go well. And also, if we get too far into that, it could get really political really fast. So that's why, however, I'm telling you, if you're going to write about something, go talk to the people of that culture. don't talk to people talking about that culture. Go talk to the actual people if you can. Or if you can't, at least do a lot of really good research. Let's see. I'm trying to read what Ellie says. My head is hurting, so give me just a second to try and make it make sense in my brain, because right now it's soup. Okay, yeah. Um, so there are definitely some things that are stereotypical, but aren't. When the stereotype is used, it's being used kind of in a vacuum and out of context. And I think I agree that that can be a difficult thing. There's one stereotype that I know a lot of. I can speak on this one with authority because I have a lot of friends who've been affected like by this. The whole Asians are good at math stereotype. I'm really close to a lot of Asian folks, and they hate that. Because everyone's like, oh, you gotta be good at calculus. And they're like, no, actually, I write books for a living. And I flunked out of math in school, so get bent. Um, that's a stereotype that is both harmful and annoying and doesn't actually right. So if stereotypes, I would just be careful using them because they can be harmful to folks and they can also narrow your audience. And that's, for example, like, I can speak on this one. When they always portray somebody who has PTSD having visual flashbacks and like there are a whole lot of things associated with uh, PTSD that aren't portrayed well in the media. Like they constantly portray people with PTSD as being dangerous. You know, like, oh, we're just gonna go crazy, and it's always soldiers too. Like, yeah, civilians like me can't possibly have PTSD, but they always portray them as being incredibly dangerous and likely to go out and hurt people. And I know a lot of veterans with PTSD, and as a person who has PTSD myself, that's not really what it's like. A flashback isn't always visual, like hallucinating that I'm in a place I'm not, experiencing something I'm not. A lot of the time, flashbacks can be an emotional reaction. So I'm reacting emotionally as if I'm in that, as if that thing is happening, but it isn't now. But I know where I am, I know who I'm talking to, I know what's going on, and sometimes I can even be like, ooh, that emotion doesn't belong here. It's not the thing that I should be feeling right now. It's a response to trauma that happened somewhere else, and can we just not do this right now? That's the function of many years of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so things like that, that is a more likely, like, a response for folks. Like, and that's one of the things that, yeah, I agree that fiction probably leans on hallucination because it's more visual, like when they're portraying it in movies, and it can make more sense, but there are other ways of doing it. Like, I've seen movies where they play audio, and it shows that the person is, like, somewhere else, sometimes else. Um, and I'm sorry you have that experience, Teague. If you ever need to talk about it, talk to me. I'm here. I will do what I can to help. I'm not a therapist, and I don't even play one on TV, but I was in it for a really long time. So if you need to talk to somebody, uh, you can chat with me. But yeah, so that is, or I know folks who are schizophrenic, and a lot of people, because for so long schizophrenia was considered the same as dissociative identity, the DID. There we go. We're just gonna call it DID now because I can't words. It took a long time for people to kind of realize that schizophrenia and DID were two separate disorders. And there is this stereotype in media, and usually the older media, it's less common now, but that conflates the two, and so people a lot of the time get this image in their head that that's a thing. Or I, not too long ago, came across somebody who they said from the start that their character was schizophrenic and that people with mental health disorders like to self-medicate, so they wanted her to go to a bar, get drugged, and use that as a way to get that character hooked on drugs because they wanted her to have that experience open the doors to her just being addicted to everything. Yeah, you can see why that's a problem. There's so many things wrong with that, like, not even just on, like, a problematic level. Yeah, very cringe. And I don't think I need to enumerate them, but for anybody who's curious, one, sometimes people with mental health disorders do self-medicate, but it's not like everybody does. And self-medication isn't always drugs. It can be like playing video games. Two, if you get drugged in a bar, you're probably going to get drugged with like Rohypnol or Rufalin or something else. And I mean, bad things are coming, but if you get drugged in a bar, usually it's going to be, one of those drugs, not like party time drugs. And those drugs aren't, I don't think those are addictive. Yeah, drugs can be prescribed. I have prescription drugs for my ADHD that I take. And that's the thing. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not going to stigmatize the fact that I have medication. I'm a human being who needs help. And it helps me function like, a human being. I know people who are on anxiety medications or depression medications, and sometimes people need help. But the whole, like, getting addicted to drugs because your drink got spiked in a bar and it starts this downward spiral, that's not how that's gonna work, really. Like, so I'm not going to say that a person with mental health issues cannot be addicted to drugs, because most often the people who get addicted to drugs are folks with problems of various different kinds. And yes, you're correct, Lead. Like, addiction is a dopamine thing, and people who are having issues with, like, depression and anxiety and other things that mess with your dopamine naturally will be looking for sources to give them dopamine because their brains aren't releasing them, and addiction is a really common result. Now, it might not be drugs, it might be, like I said, chocolate. You said chocolate, it might be video games, it could be reading. There are so many ways that, like, you could get, there's so many things that you could possibly get addicted to in life that aren't drugs and won't ruin your life. Like, addiction isn't healthy, but it's not always drugs. And it looks like you had a light bulb moment, Kataru, so there's that. And yes, absolutely nobody is giving away free pot cookies at Halloween or, like, giving out ecstasy pills to kids, because part of the reason is, do you have any idea how expensive that shit is? Like, I don't buy it, I don't use it, but it is not cheap. Yeah, but at the same time, it's really expensive. It would be like giving out $100 bills. Like, not all of those things are that expensive, but it would be like giving out a lot of money. Just throwing it away. It's not a thing that anybody's gonna do. So, so the reason, so if you're gonna lean on, like, I don't have anything against cannabis, but I'm not gonna talk about it here. I don't hate it. And if it were federally legal for me to use, I would be using it to treat things. So nothing against it, but this is just not the venue. So when I'm, talking about things that you should research and study and people you should talk to before putting things in print, that individual asking the question about getting their character hooked on drugs just because she's schizophrenic because people self-medicate and so on, the entire premise of that was a mess. And if she'd actually done her research into schizophrenia and also drug addiction and the mental health issues around drug addiction, she would not have gone down that rabbit hole in the way that she did. And I'm not offended that she asked the question out of ignorance. Like, the reason I keep harping on this person is because they were a jerk. And I got dogpiled on when I was like, that's not how it works. And as somebody who deals with mental health illness, maybe stop portraying us like that, because, wow, we deal with enough stigma already. And It can be, Carly, that is absolutely, that can be a thing. Like, some folks can't really do first person because they can't get themselves that deep into another person's experience, which is a totally fair and reasonable thing. There are multiple ways to write a story, and there's no one true way. So if you don't like first person and can't connect with somebody that, isn't you that deeply and can't imagine how their brain works, that's fine. If you're writing third person and you don't, you can exactly, you can ask people what their experience is and you can get data, but maybe don't write it in first person if you can't really get that far into it. That's fine. And yes, smack that person with a newspaper. Third person is the norm in certain genres, not in others. First person is pretty common in urban fantasy and sometimes in high fantasy, but urban fantasy, it's really common. Also in young adult, it's really common there too. So, it depending on what genre you're writing, it may or may not be common, but there's nothing wrong with writing third person. It is the I think it's probably the most common. Let's see. So, the places you can go to research and find people with your experience. The first thing you should do before asking a human being to do what is called emotional labor is research it on your own as much as you reasonably can. So, pull out that search engine, start looking at science, if it's something that is scientifically related. Start looking at, there are plenty of places where you can find blogs on things. So, while I am writing my novels set in Boston, now this isn't about another experience, this is just research. I am not as familiar with the city of Boston as some of my friends are. So I went to them and I was like, hey, could you tell me what it's like to be in this location? But this was after I looked at that location on Google Maps and did as much street view wandering around as possible. For example, let's pull up Old North Church. Book 2 of my series deals heavily with the historical landmark of the Old North Church in Boston, which some of you may or may not know. The Paul Revere ride, that's kind of an American thing. If you're not American, it may not be something you know about, but it was a big thing for the Revolutionary War when the United States broke away from Britain, and Paul Revere was a really important figure in all of that. And the Old North Church was where he started his famous Paul Revere's ride, which was to go warn some of the American generals that the British were trying to sneak in and start a fight. And it began at the Old North Church. That is a question for another day, Nid. But that is a very fair question. So, when I was researching the Old North Church, the first thing I did was look at it on Google Maps. I pulled up the campus, and I zoomed in and took a look at what the church looks like from the satellite view. And then I grabbed the little person and dropped them in and did the street view, because there are some folks who've uploaded photos of the inside. And I did as much studying about the layout. I pulled up floor plans from the Historical Society in Boston of the layout of the Old North Church, and I researched as much as possible what the Old North Church was like. The reason I didn't go down there myself is obviously because of COVID. They aren't doing tours right now, and I couldn't go in myself. I'd planned to, but then COVID cases started spiking, and it just hasn't been the highest thing on my to-do list right now. And so instead of going and having that experience myself, I contacted one of their curators and I asked some questions, because part of my book takes place in the crypt. It's underneath Old North Church. It's in the basement. And it's a really neat space. And so having no opportunity to go down there, I also shout out here, played Fallout 4, and Fallout 4 is set in Boston, and it has the Old North Church in it. Well, it's not entirely perfect, it's an idea, and I used that to go down into the basement and look around. So these are kind of some things that I did. And, honey? My husband's playing video games in the background and died. So you have these... You should do, like, the research like that before you go to a person. People are pressing F to pay homage to your sadness, and also Kataru says to get good. You deserved that.
Not cool, bro.
You deserved that. So, but start your research with as much as you can do on your own within reason. So I looked at photos, I pulled up their website, I checked the whole place out. I did my best to pull up the floor plans, and then finally I emailed somebody who worked there and said, look, I've done as much research as I can. I have some questions about the crypt that my research just can't pull up. And the questions were like, what does it smell like down there? Like, is it colder? Is it damp? What does it feel like to be in that space? Those are questions I can't ask Google, because Google doesn't know. It can be like, well, here's the layout of the Old North Church, and here's the layout of the basement, but I don't know if it's cold. So those are questions that only another human could answer for me. And it's kind of like that when you're writing about pretty much anything that you haven't experienced yourself. So you can research, you can find out the layout of the location, or, you know, the basic information. So if I was trying to write about, say, Turkey, I could go online and I could research the history of Turkey and the culture of Turkey, and I could study all of the various different aspects of the location as best I could, and find the physical, like, you know, I could find photos and look at the satellite pictures and watch documentaries about it. But if I wanted to know what it was really like to live there, I would gather as much data as I could, and then I'd ask Lead, like, okay, so I have some questions about what it's like to live in Turkey in these locations. Like, what can you tell me about this? But I'd come to him with specific questions, having done my research. So it's not, you know, starting from ground zero where Lead has to be like, okay, well, this is the capital of Turkey, and here's the basic landscape of Turkey, and all the this other information that I could gather by myself outside of it. And that is 12, sorry, yeah, that's 12,000 years of historical documentation that is a rabbit hole that I would never come out of if I went down it. But my point being here is that I could do a bunch of research on my own to understand at least the basics of Turkish culture and the landscape and everything else before I went to Lead with, like, okay, so what, like, when you want to go out for dinner, how far do you have to go to get to a restaurant? Or what does the restaurant smell like while you're in it? And things like that. Like, those are questions that I couldn't ask Google necessarily, but I could ask him if I had something specific I wanted him to answer. So, starting with the overarching, like, data gathering, just the hard data, I can do that on my own. I don't need somebody else to do it for me. And with my degree in history, I pretty much got a degree in research, more or less. Like, if it's anthropological or, like, society or historical research, I know how to do that. That's what I got my degree in. And I can do a lot of that on my own. If you don't know how to research, there are plenty of ways that you can learn how, or if you don't know how to do research on your own, I'm happy to give you some guidelines on how to research things and get actual data. But, you know, do some of the research, and then eventually, once you've gotten to the point where you've gathered all of the information you can on your own, that's when you go to somebody who's lived the experience and been like, okay, so here's what I know, here's what I don't know, can you help me with what I don't know? And I'm sure it depends on the restaurant. Like, it was just an example off the top of my head of something that I couldn't figure out on Google. So, and right, anagram, that's a perfect, you know, where do people tend to sit in this rotate? Like, if I gave you a specific restaurant that I knew you'd been to, like, you could give me the information of who usually sits where. Well, see, there you go. Like, corners and outside are popular. Like, that's something that uh, you know, now we know, and it's not something I could have learned on Google, but you live there, so you can tell us that. And that's one of the ways that you can really effectively write an experience you don't have is start with the macro on your own, like do the research on the big picture, and then slowly zero in until you're talking to a couple of people who have had that experience who can give you that feedback. And once you've done all that, once you've written it, you send your manuscript to those people. So for example, like with the Old North Church, as soon as my first book comes out, I'm going to send the lady who gave me that research information, book 1, and I'm going to send her the most edited version I can of book 2 and be like, does this track? Does this make sense? And does it feel like it's authentic to what I'm writing? Well, I mean, sending an ebook copy of a book to somebody doesn't cost me anything. I'm also going to be sending physical copies of my book to a few of my idols, so sending an ebook copy to people it's not out of my way, and if I'm asking her to do labor for me, I might as well give her something nice in return. It seems like it would be it seems like it would just be the respectful thing to do, because I'm asking for her time. Well, right, Teague, that's, that is part of it, is I'm fostering a relationship with somebody who might be willing to give me data going forward about things. I also have a close friend who was a tour guide in Boston for many years, and I have her reading my books. And she's super jazzed about it. She loves my writing. And if I wrote something inaccurate about Boston, she'd be like, no. I have another friend of mine who is very experienced in the nautical scene in Boston. Like, he had a sailboat that he used to sail around that area a lot and is very familiar with Boston and with docks in general. And I had a question about a shipping lane in Boston for book 3 that I needed answered. So I went to him and I was like, okay, so here's the photos from Google Maps. Can you help me find out the information about this spot? Because I don't know where to look. And he gave me a bunch of data about what it's like to be on the port and what it's like to be in that area and what that looks like, and helped me track down the information I needed. And I'm going to have him read the scenes that have to do with the piers and stuff because, frankly, he knows that kind of thing. And I also have Leslie in this group. Some of you may or may not know her. She's been in and out on Discord. She's very busy. But I had a question about specifically whether or not somebody in the CIA would end up with military care after they leave the CIA, or like do they get taken care of by the VA, or who takes care of them? And in reality, like if somebody in the CIA gets injured and has to leave, they get put on the same disability my husband is on, and they get nothing special. So that is something I learned because I didn't know if the CIA had since they work so closely with the military, if there was something kind of special in there, and she knows how the medical system works, particularly with the military, because she deals with that for work. But fostering all of these kind of contacts with people who've been there and done the thing is kind of what I'm getting at. Like, writing the scene in book 1 where they're in a colonial graveyard, and some information about specifically what it's like to be inside the I keep wanting to call it a sepulcher, but it's not. The vault, there we go, in a graveyard that from that time period. I've never actually been inside a vault in the graveyard, but I kind of know what they look like, so I asked some questions to my friend who was a gravedigger and worked in these graveyards, and he gave me some information. And that is kind of, I didn't have that life experience. I didn't know what it was like to be inside one of those. Again, these are things like sights, sounds, smells, like, what does the air taste like? What does the stone feel like? I mean, some of it I can imagine. I know what damp stone feels like, but any kind of, like, is there anything I should really know about these things that I don't? And so having not had the experience that my character's about to, I went to somebody who I knew had, and I got the data from them. And you can use that method of research on anything from contentious issues, like what is it like to be transgender, Or you can use it on something as uncontentious as, I've never been inside the Old North Church. Can you give me some information about, like, what it's like in there? And that kind of research is really invaluable to a writer, because the whole write what you know thing is, it's trite and it's useful, and yes, you should not write about things that you know nothing about. And I understand we don't know what it's like to ride the back of a dragon. In fantasy, you research things that are close enough. Like, if you like, I have no idea what it's like to ride on a dragon. No idea whatsoever. But I have ridden on a horse. So I know what it's like to have something very large and with a mind of its own that you're sitting on, that it's gonna probably go where it feels like going, and there's only so much you can do to stop it. I know what that experience is like. And Teague, yes, research can be boring. It is not always super exciting. And unfortunately, it is one of those things that you don't have to research everything perfectly. Like, I write historical fantasy sometimes, and I am a historian. And, write what you know is boring. Yeah, write what you know is boring. Research is phenomenal. But there is the reality of, you don't need to research every single little thing within an inch of its life before you start writing. So you don't need to torture yourself by researching a bunch of mundane crap that's not going to be relevant to you. And yes, absolutely, talking about pulling from experience, writing what you know means, like, most people have had to deal with grief in their life. Whether it is losing a friend, whether it is dealing with, a pet dying, whether it is a friendship ending or a romantic breakup, like, most people have dealt with some kind of grief in their life. So you can draw from your own experience when writing about grief. Nid, yeah, well, you can write about what you know. It might not be what you've experienced, but you might know intellectually. Kitaru. Shame. Shame. Bad. Heather's not even here, and ugh, goodness. What am I gonna do with you folks? Anyway. Naughty, naughty. I don't want to know how it works in rodents, Lead. And yeah, speculative biology is fine, like... Look what you've done! Yeah, see, look what you did! Look what you've unleashed on all of us. No, I'm not editing your spicy comments in post-production. Those get to be put up for the rest of the world to deal with, because I had to read them. So, this kind of research is important. And it can be a lot of fun. Like, I know most of you, I don't need to preach to the choir as far as research goes. Like, most of us will go down the rabbit hole at the drop of a hat to avoid writing because, oh no, I have to write. Time to research things. Which, is a thing. I've gone down the, wiki rabbit hole more than once in an attempt to not have to write what I'm writing right now. That is absolutely a thing we've all done, I think. So, that is a reality. But yes, the research as much as possible and then talk to somebody who's lived the experience is, like, the number one thing I can think of when dealing with writing about an experience or something you have not had yourself. There are the wonders of the internet also means that you're able to find people who've had that experience, whether you watch somebody talking about it on, like, YouTube. There are so many videos on YouTube talking about experiences that people have had that, first-hand accounts of things that people have had that we never would have had access to before. So if you can't find a human being to talk to one-on-one, next best thing is to watch somebody talking about it on a video if you can, and listen to what people say. Oh, shoes, okay. My brain deleted the word shoes, and it sounded to me like you were talking about, like, removing and adding front limbs of rodents really quick, and my brain made the windows like pong dee 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 noise, and I had no idea what was going on. Squirrel shoes. Yep. Well, we always end up at porn and squirrels. That's just kind of how this group goes. That is my life. Porn and squirrels. Or yeah, you're welcome, Teague. Welcome to the insanity. This is where we always end up at the end of the end of the talks. Um, oh goodness. And all joking aside, though, um, we have a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any questions about? You're welcome, Carly. Does anybody have any questions about anything as far as research goes, or anything else? Like before we wander off into the great unknown. You're very welcome, Teague. I look very red on camera right now. I don't know why. Like, this video is going to be interesting. It looks like I'm shooting in, like, in hell or something, which I suppose is apropos. Yes, this is going on YouTube. If you have questions that are not YouTube friendly, you can either wait or message me specifically. How do you find cheating folks? You could look up online and, like, try Reddit. You might be able to find some folks willing to talk to you anonymously about it. Well, some people might struggle with imagining certain things, or, you know, what goes through people's minds when they're doing that because it's not in their nature. I mean, yes, we're already past, well, I mean, YouTube friendly is, okay, YouTube can be 18 plus. I just, you know, I'm not monetizing anything. No, you're fine, you're fine. The joking is fine. It doesn't hurt anything. Um, yes, the chat goes on YouTube because it's where I pull the information from. If you are uncomfortable with anything going up on YouTube that you have said, I can try and edit it out, though I'm not an expert at that, and it might take me a long time, or I can just not upload the video. But these videos are just going, they're just going onto a YouTube channel, mostly kind of aggregate for folks who missed the meeting. Okay. So but in general, if anybody has questions that come up during group that they're not comfortable with going on YouTube, you can message me after and I will answer them. Or if you have anything more personal, feel free to message me, or we can talk about it after the recording ends. Teague, most of the time, I have D&D directly after this, so I'm not usually available immediately after. I don't today because I feel awful, so I'm not. But I'm usually around in the evening. Nice! Ellie, that's a great resource. So Nidnid, as far as cheating people, I would try Reddit. You might be able to get folks who are willing to talk since it's an anonymous platform, more or less. And you might get some information there. Honestly, Reddit is a really good resource for getting information about things that people might not be willing to talk about if their real name is attached. Feminine female characters. We can definitely talk about that, though, like, that's an entire topic on its own, and we're running up against time. But if you have questions about, like, writing a feminine female character, feel free to, like, ask the general group. I am not a super feminine person, as most of you've probably picked up by now. But yeah, we can talk about that. That also might be, like, Heather might have some insight on that since she writes romance, and a lot of her characters are very feminine and very, like, classically feminine in a delightful way. There are a lot of folks here who might be able to answer that question for you in more and better detail than I can, for sure. Does anybody else have anything you're working or you'd like to answer that I can help with? I'm going to take the silence as a probably not. So you are all aware, on December 14th, which is in a few weeks, it's a Tuesday, so this may or may not affect what we're doing But the December 14th, I am having surgery on my left elbow, and I may or may not be around for the workshop after that because I will be healing. And I'm going to be getting shoulder surgery not too far in the future too, and there's a definite chance that I will not be around for a while after that as far as recording goes. I will be in the group, but I'm not sure how up I'll be to running meetings following those. I don't have the shoulder surgery scheduled yet, but December 14th is my elbow surgery, and we'll see how I am that day. Thank you very much, Teague. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Carly. You're very sweet. I appreciate you. I think I will end the recording here, and I know you'll survive, guys. I know you will. You're phenomenal, and I'll be around in chat, but so I'm gonna end the recording and talk to y'all next week.